Picture this. A well-dressed man, somewhere in his 70s, walks up to the entrance of one of the hottest nightclubs in town. The line is buzzing with energy, filled with young partygoers excited for a night of dancing, flashing lights, and music blasting until the early hours of the morning. This man, though, isn't here for a wild night of celebration. No, he's here for something much more serious, something deeper. The bouncer, standing at the door, takes one look at him, scrutinizing his face and his step as he approaches. With a quick glance at the man's attire, the bouncer immediately makes a snap decision. Without so much as a second thought, he holds up a hand and shakes his head, signaling that the man won't be allowed in. The reason? His age. The man is turned away, with the bouncer assuming that someone so old doesn't belong in the fast-paced, high-energy world of clubbing. At first glance, it seems like just another case of an older individual being dismissed or overlooked in a world that often idolizes youth and vigor. But hold on. You're about to discover why this moment was anything but ordinary. Because that man, the one denied entry with a mere glance, wasn't just any old man. And that ID he carried? Well, let's just say it was about to flip this whole situation on its head. But I'm getting ahead of myself, aren't I? Stick with me here. You're going to want to stay until the end to find out the shocking twist to this story. Now, I know what you might be thinking. You're probably wondering why on earth this story matters. Why does it matter if an older man was turned away from a nightclub? The truth is, this story isn't just about age or assumptions. It's about breaking stereotypes, challenging the status quo, and discovering the power of identity, real identity. We've all seen it happen. An older person gets brushed aside, ignored, or even dismissed in favor of someone younger, someone seemingly more relevant. The world can often treat older generations as invisible, as though their wisdom, experiences, and abilities are outdated or irrelevant. But let me tell you, this man's story is going to change your perception of what's possible, no matter how old you are or how others see you. Now, imagine yourself in his shoes for just a second. You walk up to a nightclub, excited for a night out, ready to have fun, ready to share your story, your presence, your energy. And then, boom, without even being given a chance to prove it, you're turned away. It's not because of your actions, not because of who you are as a person, but because of an assumption that someone made about you based on the way you look, based on the idea of what your age might mean. Can you feel the sting of that rejection? The feeling of being discounted simply because of the way you look or the stage of life you're in. It's something many of us have felt at one time or another, even if in different contexts. But here's where the story takes a turn, because that man wasn't just some random guy who was going to let the bouncer's judgment slide. Oh no. What happened next? Well, I'll tell you, it's a twist that will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about appearances, assumptions, and the stories people carry with them. As the man stands there, the bouncer begins to notice something, a small glimmer of defiance in the older man's eyes. His calm demeanor suddenly shifts, and the man pulls out his ID. The bouncer, barely looking at it, starts to hand it back without even checking it fully. But then something catches his eye. He stops. The tone shifts. The mood changes. The man's ID holds the answer that will change everything. This moment is the one that will make you ask, how could I have not seen that coming? I don't want to give it all away just yet, but here's what I will say. This story is about much more than a simple encounter at the door of a club. It's about confronting the invisible barriers that society sets up around us, about breaking through the walls of judgment that others build for us, and about how sometimes the most unlikely people have the power to shatter those walls in the most surprising ways. As the night unfolds and this encounter grows more intense, we see that the real conflict here isn't just about getting into a nightclub. It's about identity, respect, and the sometimes shocking ways people are capable of surprising us. The man's story and his ID unlock a narrative that challenges everything the bouncer thought he knew about who belonged where, about who has the right to live boldly and unapologetically, no matter their age or what others assume. So, let's take this journey together. I promise you, by the end of the story, you'll look at people differently. You'll think twice before you make assumptions about anyone based on their appearance. And you'll be amazed at how one simple moment of recognition and respect can shift everything. You're going to want to stay to the very end because, trust me, this story is not what it seems. The answer to why this old man was turned away from that club will leave you stunned. Are you ready to hear it? Don't go anywhere. This is just the beginning. The moment the bouncer finally looks at that ID and realizes who the man really is, that's the moment everything changes. So keep watching, because what happens next will completely flip your understanding of age, identity, and respect. And trust me, you won't see it coming. Stay with me. We're not even halfway through. What happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about age, wisdom, and the power of what's hidden beneath the surface. You won't want to miss it. The man, still standing in front of the club's entrance, holds his ground as the bouncer stares at his ID. The shift in the bouncer's expression is barely noticeable, but it's enough to make the air feel charged, as if the night itself has just taken a sharp turn. The crowd around them seems to hold its breath, sensing that something unexpected is unfolding. The club's neon lights flicker overhead, casting shadows that seem to deepen the mystery. This wasn't just about a simple rejection anymore. Something was off. Something was far more complicated than anyone had anticipated. But who was this man, really? What was it that had caused this night to take such a bizarre twist? As the minutes tick by, more questions start swirling in the back of your mind. You begin to wonder, how did this man even end up at this club in the first place? He didn't look like the type of person who typically enjoyed such a scene. His clothes, while sharp, had a certain air of formality that contrasted sharply with the youthful, carefree vibe of the crowd waiting in line. He didn't seem like someone who had recently thrown on a tuxedo to join the nightlife scene on a whim. No, there was something more to him. Something more significant that was drawing him here, to this exact moment, standing face to face with the bouncer. And now, something about the way the bouncer was acting made it clear that this man's past was more than a little complicated. At first glance, the man seemed like just a regular senior citizen, someone who might have been enjoying a quiet evening out on the town. But as we dig deeper, it becomes clear that this wasn't just any man. His life hadn't been spent sitting at home, sipping tea and watching television. Far from it. Over the past few years, he had lived a life that most people his age could only dream of or perhaps fear. He had a past marked by both triumph and tragedy, moments that defined his character in ways no one could truly understand until they looked deeper. The man, whose name was Michael, had once been a renowned figure in the world of high-stakes business, a man whose name had graced the front pages of financial magazines. In his prime, he was known for his sharp mind and even sharper instinct, a businessman who could make deals that left his competitors in the dust. But it wasn't just his business dealings that had put him on the map. Michael had a reputation for always being several steps ahead of everyone else. He had friends in high places, connections in places that most people couldn't even dream of, and enemies who whispered his name in fear. His world was a mix of power and danger, with people constantly trying to use him or take advantage of him. But over time, Michael had grown tired of the cutthroat game. It had taken a toll on him, emotionally, mentally, and even physically. After a particularly ugly business scandal that had almost ruined him, Michael stepped away from the spotlight and tried to live a quieter life. Yet, there was always a pull, something that kept drawing him back to the chaos he'd worked so hard to escape. Was this visit to the club part of that unfinished business? Did he have something to prove? Or was it something even darker that had brought him here tonight? What nobody could have known, what even Michael himself had struggled to grasp, was that this wasn't just a random night out. His return to the public eye wasn't a coincidence. Behind that quiet exterior, Michael was being pulled into something much more dangerous than he could have ever anticipated. Over the past few months, he had become involved in a web of secrets and lies, one that was slowly but surely starting to close in on him. You see, Michael hadn't just disappeared from the public eye for a peaceful retirement. He had been trying to put out the flames of a dangerous past that kept resurfacing in the shadows. He had been approached by an old acquaintance, someone from his business days, who had reappeared with an offer that Michael couldn't refuse. The offer, however, came with strings attached, and those strings had begun to tighten around him in ways he hadn't expected. And then there was the issue of the club itself. Michael had no business being there. His recent attempts to live a low-key life had led him to places far quieter than a nightclub. But on that night, something had compelled him to venture out into the world once again. Was it curiosity? Or was there something or someone waiting for him there? As he stood there, facing the bouncer, the weight of everything he had kept hidden was about to be exposed. That ID, the one that had made the bouncer stop in his tracks, held the key to unraveling all the pieces of his puzzle. But it wasn't just about who Michael was. It was about what he had left behind. The people who had once been part of his life were no longer just distant memories. They were coming back into his world, and with them came the ghosts of things he had tried to bury. Among these people, there were a few who still held grudges against him. A few who had lost everything when Michael had turned his back on the business world. These were the people who would stop at nothing to make sure he paid for his past. They were the ones who would be watching tonight, waiting for the moment when he would slip up. Some of them might be in the crowd, hiding behind the faceless masses, their eyes trained on Michael. Others, though, were far more dangerous. They were the ones who had never forgotten, the ones who had always known that Michael would one day come back to haunt them. These were the people who had nothing left to lose, and they were ready to strike when the time was right. But that's not all. There was also a second story unfolding behind the scenes, one that involved a much more personal matter. Michael wasn't just running from business rivals or people who wanted to settle old scores. There was someone much closer to him, someone who had been watching from the shadows for a long time, someone who had been waiting for the perfect moment to make their move. Could they be in the club tonight? Had Michael unknowingly stepped into a trap he couldn't escape? Was he, in fact, not just trying to relive a moment from his past, but walking straight into the hands of someone who wanted to see him fall? As the minutes ticked by, the tension grew. Michael's heart pounded as he awaited the bouncer's next move. The club's music, still thumping in the background, seemed to grow fainter and fainter as his mind raced with possibilities. He had no idea what was coming next. He only knew that whatever happened, his life was about to change forever. And just when it seemed like the bouncer was about to speak, something caught his attention, a subtle shift in the crowd, a new presence emerging from the shadows. Was it a friend? An ally? Or was it something else entirely, someone who had been watching, waiting for this exact moment? The mystery deepens and Michael's fate teeters on the edge, about to spiral into a chaos he might never recover from. As Michael stood there, still facing the bouncer, the world around him seemed to slow down. The music from the club had faded into the background, replaced by the rush of blood in his ears. For a moment, it felt like he was outside time, his every decision hanging in the air, each choice leading him down an unknown path. His idea had caught the bouncer's attention, but now, something was different. The shift in the bouncer's demeanor had been quick, almost too quick, like he was hiding something, like he knew more than he was letting on. But why would he? What could he possibly know about a man like Michael? It was at that moment, as Michael's mind raced through every possibility, that a figure in the crowd caught his eye. She was standing at the back of the line, her gaze locked onto him, her expression unreadable. It was a woman he hadn't seen in years, Sarah, an old acquaintance from his business days. The kind of person who smiled in your face, but you always felt like there was something more lurking just beneath the surface. Michael's gut tightened. Why was she here? She didn't belong in this world anymore, not with everything he had walked away from. Was it just coincidence? Or had she come here for a reason, to remind him of something he'd rather forget? Before he could process it, Sarah made her move. She stepped forward, catching the bouncer's attention, and whispered something in his ear. Michael could see the change in the bouncer's posture, slightly more relaxed, almost as if a weight had been lifted. And then, without a word, the bouncer gestured for Michael to enter the club, his earlier resistance gone in an instant. It all happened so quickly, too quickly. Michael felt a chill crawl up his spine. The encounter, the bouncer's sudden shift, the mysterious presence of Sarah, it all felt orchestrated, like pieces of a puzzle he didn't have the full picture for yet. Inside the club, the atmosphere was thick with energy. The lights, the music, the laughter. It was the kind of scene Michael had grown used to back in the days when he was immersed in the fast-paced world of business and high society. But tonight, everything felt off. The familiarity of the setting only made the unease inside him grow stronger. Sarah's reappearance, the sudden shift in the bouncer's behavior, it was too much to ignore. Something was going on, something beyond the surface level, and Michael couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pulled into something bigger than he had anticipated. As Michael made his way through the crowded club, he tried to shake off the unease that had settled over him. He pushed past the flashing lights and the bodies moving on the dance floor, trying to focus. He couldn't let distractions get the best of him. Not now, not when he was so close to uncovering the truth. But as he made his way toward a quieter corner of the club, something strange happened. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He fished it out, expecting a message, but when he looked at the screen, there was nothing, no message, no missed call. Just an alert that the phone's battery was almost dead. He swiped to turn off the screen, and was about to pocket it when something caught his eye. A notification, barely visible at the top of the screen, a name he didn't recognize. It was an encrypted message, the kind he knew to be from the kind of people who dealt with business deals too dangerous to put in writing. The message was short, a single line that sent a shock of cold dread through him. "Stop looking. It's too late." His fingers trembled as he stared at the message, trying to process what it meant. Who was this? Why now, after all these years? And how did they know he was here, in this club, at this very moment? He thought back to the people who had come into his life over the years, the ones who had come and gone, but none of them seemed to fit this mysterious sender. The text was a warning, plain and simple. But who was it protecting? And why was Michael so certain that this wasn't just a random threat? As he stood there, lost in thought, Sarah appeared beside him, her presence as quiet as ever. She didn't speak at first, just stood there with a faint, knowing smile on her lips. Michael turned to face her, his suspicion growing. Was she the one behind the warning? Had she been the one to send the message, to make sure he stayed quiet about whatever he was digging into? Or was she somehow connected to those who wanted him to stop? Her eyes met his, and there was something there, a flicker of recognition, or perhaps an old guilt. But she didn't say anything. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope, handing it to him with a steady hand. Michael took it, his mind racing. This wasn't just a casual gesture. There was something in that envelope. It was important. He didn't open it right away, but he could feel the weight of it in his hand. Before he could ask her what it was, Sarah spoke, her voice low, almost too calm. "Michael, you don't want to go down this road. Some things are better left buried." Her words hit him like a wave, but he didn't let them show. He looked at her, trying to gauge whether this was an attempt to manipulate him or if there was some deeper truth she was trying to convey. But then, before he could say anything, she turned and walked away without another word, disappearing into the crowd. Michael was left standing there, holding the envelope, his heart pounding in his chest. He had always trusted Sarah, or at least he had once, back when their paths had crossed in the business world. But now there was doubt. Was she here to help him? Or was she trying to stop him from uncovering something that could ruin them both? With his phone buzzing again, Michael glanced down at the screen. This time, there was no encrypted message. Just a missed call. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code, it was one he knew well. The call came from a place he hadn't thought about in years, an old friend, or perhaps an old enemy, someone from the past he thought was gone for good. His gut tightened as he realized that he was no longer in control of the situation. Something had changed. The people who were once distant shadows were closing in. And now, Michael was no longer just trying to uncover the truth. He was being forced into a corner, with threats coming from every direction. He hesitated for only a moment before opening the envelope Sarah had given him. The contents?
A key.
But what did it unlock? And why was Sarah handing it to him now, of all times? The answers he sought were just out of reach, and he could feel the walls closing in. As he turned the key over in his hands, a voice echoed in his mind, one he couldn't shake. "You've gone too far, Michael." It's too late to turn back. The question was no longer if he would find the truth. It was whether he could survive the consequences of uncovering it. As Michael stood there, still holding the key Sarah had given him, the weight of the moment pressed down on him harder than ever. His thoughts were spiraling, trying to piece together the fragments of a puzzle that seemed to shift every time he thought he had a grip on it. But just as he was about to tuck the key into his pocket and leave the club to figure out his next move, his phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't just a notification or a mysterious message. It was a call from someone he hadn't heard from in years, someone who had once been his closest ally, his business partner, and a man he thought he could trust more than anyone else. Evan. Evan's voice on the other end of the line was calm, but there was a distinct edge to it, a note of urgency that made Michael's stomach tighten. "Michael, you need to listen carefully," Evan said, his voice low. "I know you're probably deep into whatever it is you're doing, but I've received the same warning. They're coming after both of us. I don't know how, but I just got a message, exactly like the one you received." The silence on the line was heavy as Michael processed the words. It was one thing for him to be pulled into something he didn't fully understand, but now Evan, someone who had always kept a low profile and stayed out of trouble, was involved too. The realization hit like a slap across the face. Whatever was going on, it was bigger than just him. Evan continued, his voice shaking slightly now. "I don't know who they are, but I think we both know who this goes back to. It's that old project, the one we left behind all those years ago. The one we thought was buried." Michael's mind instantly went to the project Evan was referring to, a secretive business venture they'd both been involved in, a deal so murky that it had cost them both their reputations and their professional futures when it fell apart. The details of that venture were supposed to be locked away, buried beneath the years of legal battles and non-disclosure agreements they'd both signed. But now, it seemed as though someone was dredging it all back up, pulling them both into a situation they had long tried to escape. Michael's breath hitched as the implications of Evan's words sank in. It wasn't just a warning. This was a threat that tied both their past and their present together. Someone was digging into that old project, and they weren't going to stop until they had what they wanted. But what was it they were after? And why were they coming for Michael and Evan now, so many years after the fact? As Michael turned the key over in his hand once more, he realized with a sinking feeling that his search for answers had just taken a dangerous turn. This wasn't just about finding the truth anymore, it was about survival. Before he could respond to Evan, the line went dead. No warning, no sign of the call ending, just silence. He stared at the phone in his hand, his mind racing. The fact that Evan had received the same message, the same threat, only added to the tangled web of mystery. Had Sarah known about this? Was she a part of this? Or was she also a pawn in someone else's game? The more Michael thought about it, the more uncertain he became. Everything was interconnected in ways he couldn't quite understand, and every step he took seemed to lead him further down a path he didn't want to follow. As Michael left the club and made his way back to his car, his thoughts were spinning. But the moment he got inside and closed the door behind him, he froze. There, sitting in the passenger seat, was a man he didn't recognize. His presence was like an ice-cold breath on Michael's neck, a complete shock to him. The man didn't look dangerous, at least not physically, but there was something about his stillness that made the hairs on the back of Michael's neck stand up. He was calm, too calm, as though he'd been waiting there for hours. The stranger didn't speak, but when Michael finally found his voice, he asked the only question that made sense. "Who are you?" The man's response was simple, and yet, it sent a chill through Michael's entire body. "I'm here to make sure you don't make things worse for yourself." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, one that looked eerily similar to the one Sarah had handed him earlier. As Michael took the envelope, the man added, "You've been warned. You don't know who you're dealing with, but I do. And trust me, you don't want to go down this road." The man stood up, his movements slow and deliberate, and then exited the car without another word. Michael was left staring at the envelope in his hand, his heart pounding with uncertainty. This wasn't just about Sarah anymore. It wasn't just about Evan or the key. Whoever was behind this, whoever was orchestrating this mess, they had eyes everywhere. And they weren't just watching Michael, they were watching anyone who got too close to the truth. He opened the envelope cautiously, half expecting to find more cryptic messages or threats. But instead, what he found was something far more disturbing: a photograph. At first glance, it seemed innocuous enough, just a blurry image of a city street at night, the kind of photo anyone might take while walking around. But as Michael studied it more closely, he realized that the image was taken just a few blocks from where he had been earlier that night. And standing in the background, barely visible in the dim light, was someone he recognized, someone he hadn't seen in years, someone who was supposed to be long gone from his life. Victor, a former associate from the disastrous project that had caused all the problems in the first place. Victor's reappearance in the photograph sent a cold shiver down Michael's spine. How could Victor have been there, so close to him, without him noticing? And why had someone gone through the trouble of sending him this photo, a reminder of his past mistakes, a past he had desperately tried to bury? Michael's mind raced as he realized that everything was connected. The messages, the threats, the people who seemed to be watching his every move, they were all tied to Victor, the one person who had always operated in the shadows, pulling strings and manipulating those around him. But why was Victor back now? And more importantly, what did he want? The questions mounted, each one more pressing than the last, and as Michael sat there, staring at the photograph, the stakes grew higher. The answers were just beyond his reach, and every step he took seemed to lead to more questions. Was there anyone he could trust? Who was pulling the strings behind the scenes? And what did they want with him and with Evan, who had already been pulled into this mess? As Michael drove away from the parking lot, his mind whirling with confusion and fear, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was in way over his head. The twists and turns of the mystery were getting darker, and with every new discovery, the danger grew. The truth was out there, but it was buried beneath layers of deceit, and the more Michael uncovered, the more he realized just how deep the rabbit hole went. And as for the mysterious figure who had just warned him, Michael couldn't help but wonder if they were friend or foe, and if they, too, had their own secrets to hide. One thing was certain: the journey he was on had only just begun. The next morning, Michael woke up to the unsettling hum of his phone vibrating on the bedside table. His heart skipped a beat as he glanced at the screen, a sense of dread crawling up his spine. It was a message from Evan. He almost didn't want to open it, afraid of what he might find. After everything that had happened, he wasn't sure he could handle any more bad news. But the anxiety gnawed at him, and he picked up the phone anyway. "Michael, we need to talk. I can't keep doing this. Someone's been following me. I've seen them twice now, always in the shadows, never close enough to get a good look at. They're getting bolder, and I don't think we can trust anyone anymore. Meet me at the old warehouse, the one we used to work at. I'll explain everything. Please don't ignore this." Michael's stomach tightened as the words echoed in his head. Meet me at the old warehouse. That place. It was a relic of the past, a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. The place where their lives had unraveled, where they had made mistakes they could never undo. It felt like a trap, a baited invitation, but Evan's message wasn't just a plea, it was a warning. The desperation in his words was unmistakable, and Michael knew this was no longer a game. This was life or death. But as much as he knew he needed to get there, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The unease lingered as he dressed quickly, grabbing his keys and heading out the door, but the moment he stepped outside, he froze. The air felt thicker than usual, heavier, as if the whole world was holding its breath. His car was parked in the driveway, just like always, but as he glanced around, a feeling of being watched hit him like a ton of bricks. His eyes darted over the street, scanning for anything out of place. There, across the road, was a car that hadn't been there the night before, dark, unmarked, and parked just a little too far from the curb. It wasn't normal. It wasn't right. For a moment, his mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe someone was just waiting for a parking spot. But deep down, Michael knew better. He'd seen that car before. It had been parked in the shadows, just outside his window the night before. He hadn't wanted to admit it, but now the truth was undeniable. He was being followed. His pulse quickened as he got into his car, locking the doors behind him. The street felt strangely empty, too quiet. The weight of everything that had happened in the past few days pressed down on him, and the uncertainty of the situation loomed larger than ever. Who was after him? Was it Victor? The mysterious man in the parking lot? Or was it someone even more dangerous, someone he hadn't even considered? Every question only led to more, and as the reality of his situation sank in, the growing paranoia tightened its grip. As he pulled out of the driveway, his eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that dark car following him. But there was nothing there, nothing but empty streets. For a brief moment, he convinced himself that he was just imagining things. Maybe it was just the stress, maybe his mind was playing tricks on him. But the nagging feeling didn't go away. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that someone was watching him, just waiting for the right moment to strike. His phone buzzed again, and he glanced at the screen. It was a text from Sarah. "Michael, please, I need to talk to you. It's urgent. I don't know how to explain this, but I think I'm in danger too. Someone's been asking about you. I don't know who they are, but I'm scared. Meet me. Please." Fear crept into his veins as he read the message, and his mind raced. Sarah. The one person who had been with him through all this. The one person who had helped him find the key, the one who had set him on this path. But now, she was in danger too. Could she be caught up in this mess just like him? Was this all some twisted game, with no way out? He wasn't sure anymore, but one thing was certain. The stakes had just gotten higher. His phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Evan. He didn't hesitate. "Evan," he said, his voice tight with fear. "Michael, you need to get here now." Evan's voice crackled through the line. "I don't know how much longer I can stay hidden. I think they're coming for me. I don't know who they are, but they're everywhere. They." The call suddenly dropped, leaving Michael in an overwhelming silence. He stared at the phone, his heart pounding. What had just happened? Had someone cut the line? Had they found Evan? With his hands shaking, Michael slammed the car into gear and sped off toward the old warehouse. Every instinct screamed that he was walking right into a trap, but he couldn't afford to ignore Evan's warning. Not now. Not when everything was unraveling so quickly. As he drove, the streets seemed to stretch on forever, the world outside becoming more of a blur with each passing second. And then, just as he neared the warehouse, a dark figure stepped out into the street, blocking his path. Michael's foot slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt just inches from the figure. The man didn't move. He just stood there, staring at Michael with cold, empty eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke, and the world around them seemed to hold its breath. Then the man spoke, his voice low, almost a whisper. "You shouldn't have come, Michael." Michael's blood ran cold as the words hit him like a punch to the stomach. He didn't know this man, but something in his gut told him that this was no accident. This was no random encounter. It was a warning he had ignored for far too long. The man stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Michael's. "They know where you are. They know everything. And they're coming for you." Michael's heart raced as the reality of the situation hit him harder than ever. He wasn't just in danger. He was being hunted. And as the man took another step forward, Michael's mind raced. What was going on? Who was after him? And, more importantly, why? The man reached into his jacket, pulling something out. Michael braced himself, his mind spiraling with fear and uncertainty. But instead of a weapon, the man held up a photo, an old photo, one Michael recognized immediately. It was a picture of him and Evan, taken years ago, when things had still seemed normal. But in the corner of the photo, barely visible, was a figure he hadn't noticed before, someone standing in the background, hidden in the shadows, watching them. The man's voice was steady as he spoke. "They've been watching you for a long time, Michael, and they won't stop until they get what they want." As the words sank in, the world around him seemed to shift. Michael realized, with a sinking feeling in his chest, that this was just the beginning. The game had changed, and the stakes were higher than he could have ever imagined. The mystery was deeper, darker and more dangerous than he could have ever predicted, and now he was in the fight of his life. But who was the mysterious figure in the photo? And what did they want with him? The answers were still out there, but they were slipping further and further out of reach. And as Michael sat there, staring at the photo, he knew that the truth was more elusive and more dangerous than ever before. As Michael stood frozen in front of the man, the image of the old photo burning in his mind, something in the air shifted, an odd tension, like the weight of a secret about to be revealed. The man's words, chilling and cryptic, lingered like an echo in his ears. "They've been watching you for a long time, Michael. And they won't stop until they get what they want." Michael wanted to demand answers, wanted to shove him and scream at him to stop playing these twisted mind games. But deep down, he knew this wasn't a game. It never had been. His eyes flicked back to the photo the man was holding. He wanted to look away, but something compelled him to study it again, and that's when it hit him. There was something off. Something he'd missed before, something that had slipped under his radar like a whisper. At first, it had seemed like just an innocent picture from the past, nothing more than a memory of better times with Evan. But now, under the cold streetlight, a detail became horrifyingly clear. The figure in the shadows, barely visible at the edge of the frame, wasn't standing still as he had assumed. No, it was moving. A flicker of motion, barely perceptible, but unmistakable. The person wasn't watching them, they were following them. Michael's mind began to race. The implications were too much to process, but one thing was certain. Whoever this figure was, they had been involved in everything. In the disappearances, the strange encounters, the threats, it was all connected. But just as his thoughts began to spiral, the man in front of him spoke again, his voice colder this time, almost like he knew what was going through Michael's mind. "You think you've been following the right leads, Michael. You think this is about Evan or Sarah or someone else you trust. But the truth is, you've been chasing the wrong ghost all along." Michael's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" The man smirked, taking a step closer. "You still don't get it, do you? The real game is much bigger than you think. You were never meant to find the answers. You were meant to be part of the puzzle. You were always being watched by someone who's much closer to you than you realize." Michael felt the ground beneath him shift. His heart hammered in his chest. The idea that someone close to him, someone he trusted, could be behind all this was unfathomable. He wanted to push the thought away, but the man's words burrowed deeper into his mind, eating away at the certainty he had clung to for so long. Before he could react, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Sarah. "Michael, I need to tell you something. Something important. Please, meet me at the diner. We need to talk. This can't wait." A sense of urgency ripped through him. The timing was strange. How could she know about this meeting? How had she gotten the same message at the same time? Was she in danger too? Was she caught up in this web, or was she part of it? Without thinking, Michael shoved the phone back into his pocket, staring at the man who had been watching him. "What do you want from me?" The man didn't flinch. "It's not about what I want. It's about what you still don't know. You've been looking in the wrong places, Michael. The answers aren't hidden in the past. They're in the present. And the person you've been trusting the most is the one keeping you in the dark." The words hung in the air like a weight. Michael's heart stopped, his mind swirling with disbelief. Was the man talking about Sarah? Could she really be involved in all of this? How was that even possible? He couldn't bring himself to believe it. Not Sarah. She was his lifeline in this nightmare, the only one who had stood by him, who had helped him navigate the chaos. But the doubt crept in, cold and insidious, and the more he thought about it, the more plausible it seemed. What if she had been playing him from the start? What if her warnings had been a carefully crafted act to throw him off track? Before he could voice the thought, the man turned and started walking away. "You'll find out soon enough, Michael. But by then, it might be too late." He disappeared into the shadows, leaving Michael standing in the street, more confused and terrified than ever. His mind reeled. He had to go to Sarah. He had to confront her. But deep down, something told him he couldn't trust her anymore. The game had changed, and he was no longer sure who was playing what role. Everyone around him had a hidden agenda. Even the people he thought he could trust might have been pulling strings all along, playing him like a pawn. As he drove to the diner, the weight of the mystery pressing down on him, his phone buzzed once more. This time, it was a voice message from Evan. Michael didn't even have to listen to it to know something was terribly wrong.
But he did anyway.
Evan? What happened? Michael's voice trembled as he answered the message. The voice on the other end was strained, full of fear, but eerily calm. Michael, listen to me. You're not going to believe this, but I've just figured it out. The person you've been looking for, the one behind everything, they're in your inner circle. It's someone you know. Someone close to you. The message cut off abruptly, and the line went silent. Michael's breath caught in his throat. Someone close to him. The words echoed in his mind, looping like a broken record. Was it Sarah? Was it Evan himself? Had someone been manipulating them both, pulling the strings from behind the scenes? The possibilities were endless, and the truth was slipping further away with each passing second. His mind raced as he drove faster, the diner just a few blocks away now. But deep down, Michael knew one thing for sure. The truth was out there, but it was no longer something he could uncover alone. If someone was pulling the strings, it was a game he couldn't win on his own. He needed help, but who could he trust now? The walls were closing in, and the only thing he was certain of was that the answer was much darker and closer than he could have ever imagined. As the diner came into view, Michael's heart pounded. Something was waiting for him inside. Something that would change everything. But whether it would be the truth or his undoing, he couldn't say. All he could do was walk through the door and face whatever came next. As Michael stepped into the diner, the familiar hum of conversations and clinking silverware felt suddenly alien. The warm lights, the quiet chatter, it all seemed distant, as though he had crossed into a different world. His eyes scanned the room for Sarah, the familiar face that had been his constant companion through this dark labyrinth. But as he approached the table where they'd agreed to meet, he saw nothing but an empty seat, the remnants of a coffee cup still warm, and the faintest trace of anxiety hanging in the air. A cold shiver ran down his spine. He'd expected to feel relief upon seeing her, expected to find the one person who might make sense of everything. Instead, the absence of her presence felt like a sharp slap across his face. Every instinct in his body screamed that something was wrong. He hesitated, then sat down at the table, trying to keep his breathing steady. Maybe she was just running late. Maybe she was trying to gather her thoughts. But deep down, Michael knew that something else was at play. He couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread that clawed at him. The message from Evan had left him shattered, and the cryptic words from the man earlier echoed in his mind. The person you've been trusting the most is the one keeping you in the dark. His phone buzzed again, and Michael's heart leapt into his throat. It was Sarah. He quickly swiped open the message, half relieved but also deeply suspicious. Michael, I'm sorry I'm late. I didn't want to tell you this over the phone, but things have gotten complicated. Please come to the back of the diner. It's urgent. The urgency in her words twisted his stomach. Why had she suddenly changed her tone? Why wasn't she waiting at their usual spot? The fear that had been building in him surged once more. Michael stood up, his legs unsteady, his mind whirling. The back of the diner was an unusual place for their meetings. Why there? His pulse quickened, and as he walked past the rows of booths, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was a moment he'd never be able to undo. The back door creaked open as he stepped into the dimly lit hallway. His eyes immediately landed on Sarah, but something was off. She wasn't standing in the middle of the room, waiting for him like he expected. Instead, she was backed into a corner, standing with her head bowed, her body language tense. And standing just behind her, his hand casually resting on her shoulder, was a man Michael had only seen in passing, Detective Roberts. Roberts had been one of the first officers involved in the investigation into Evan's disappearance. Michael had never trusted him. Too calm, too composed in a way that made him feel like he was always one step ahead. And now here he was with Sarah. His heart pounded as everything began to click into place. Michael, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want you to find out like this." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Find out what? His voice was shaky, his hands balled into fists at his sides. He could feel the walls closing in on him. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to escape this moment before everything fell apart. But he couldn't. He had to know the truth. Sarah's eyes darted to Robert's before she took a deep breath. I never meant for this to happen. I thought I could stop it, but I couldn't. I thought I was doing the right thing. But now, her voice cracked, and for the first time since Michael had met her, she seemed completely lost. He saw the guilt etched across her face, and something inside him snapped. "What is this?" Michael demanded, his voice hoarse. "What the hell is going on?" Detective Roberts gave him a cold smile, a sharp contrast to the vulnerability Sarah had just shown. "You don't understand, do you?" he said, his voice smooth and controlled. "None of this was ever supposed to be easy. But now you're involved, and there's no going back. Not unless you make a choice." Michael's mind spun. Make a choice? He wasn't sure what he was hearing. Every moment had led him here. Every choice he'd made had led to this confrontation. He wanted to demand answers, to shake the truth from them both. But something in Robert's eyes made him pause. There was a chilling certainty there, a certainty that Michael wasn't just a player in this game. He was the pawn. Sarah's expression faltered, her voice breaking. "Michael, please. You have to understand. This isn't what it looks like. I've been trying to protect you, trying to keep you safe." Safe. Michael's voice was almost a whisper. From what? From who? Was it you all along? Were you the one who? "Michael," Sarah interrupted, her eyes wide with panic. "I didn't have a choice. I had to do this. They made me do it."
They.
Michael's throat tightened. "The people behind this," she continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. "They know everything. They've been watching you, watching all of us for years. I thought I could stop them, but I was too deep in, and now they've threatened me. They've threatened you." She paused, her eyes searching his face, pleading. "I had no choice but to play along. But I can't do it anymore. They've given me an ultimatum, Michael." An ultimatum. The word hit him like a sledgehammer. He was about to ask her what kind of ultimatum when Robert spoke again, his tone calculating. "You're standing at a crossroads, Michael. You can either walk away from all of this, walk away from the truth, and keep your safety, your life intact. Or you can keep digging. Keep uncovering the secrets, and you'll never be safe again. The choice is yours, but make it carefully. If you choose the truth, know that there are no more second chances." Michael's stomach twisted into knots. He couldn't process the weight of it all. The truth, the safety of his life. His pulse raced, and his thoughts became a blur. Everything had led him here. Every decision, every step he had taken had brought him to this moment. But could he really walk away now? Could he ignore the truth? Could he live with himself if he didn't uncover the full story? His mind screamed at him to run, to take the safe path, to escape the ever-tightening noose. But he couldn't do it. He couldn't live with the question of what if. The choice weighed on him like 1,000 pounds. His future, his safety, everything that mattered hung in the balance. And in that moment, the air between them thickened with the kind of tension that could break a person. The silence stretched long, unbearable, as he looked from Roberts to Sarah, his heart racing, his thoughts jumbled. They were right. There was no going back. No turning away from this. But where would it all lead? Finally, Michael spoke, his voice raw with the weight of the decision ahead. "I won't stop. I won't walk away from the truth." Sarah's face fell, and Robert's expression remained cold, unreadable. Michael could feel the gravity of his words settling in. He had made his choice, and now there was no turning back. As Michael walked out of the diner, the world around him seemed to tilt. The air felt thick, oppressive, as though it were closing in on him, pushing him toward an inevitable conclusion he wasn't ready to face. Every step he took was heavier than the last, his mind spinning with the truth he was still trying to comprehend. He had made his choice. There was no turning back. He had chosen the path of truth, but now, more than ever, he realized the danger of what that meant. He had thought it was just about Evan. Just a missing person, a case that had caught his attention, something to solve, something to fix. But the closer he got to the truth, the more he understood that it was never just about Evan. It was always bigger than that. He was just a pawn in a much larger game, one that involved more people, more forces, more shadows than he could have ever imagined. Michael's mind raced as he drove down the empty road, headlights cutting through the night like knives. The wind outside howled, and the chill in the air matched the cold creeping into his bones. He could still hear Robert's voice in his head, echoing with that chilling certainty. If you choose the truth, know that there are no more second chances. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his spiraling thoughts. It was Sarah again, another message flashing on the screen. Meet me at the old warehouse on 5th. It's the only way. The words hit him like a slap in the face, his heart lurching with dread. He had no time to think. He didn't even want to know what Sarah had to say anymore. He already knew it would be worse than anything he had imagined. The truth always was. As he pulled into the abandoned industrial area on 5th, he was immediately struck by how silent it was. The warehouse loomed ahead, dark and imposing, like a fortress hiding secrets too dangerous to reveal. His gut twisted, but he didn't hesitate. He parked his car, his hands shaking as he grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to turn around, to walk away, but he couldn't. The truth was a drug now, and he was addicted to it. The warehouse door creaked as he pushed it open, stepping into the cold darkness. His flashlight beam sliced through the shadows, revealing rows of empty crates and metal beams. But there was something off about the place. The floorboards creaked under his weight, and the air felt thick, almost suffocating. It wasn't just a warehouse. It was a waiting room for something far worse. And then he saw her.
Sarah.
But she wasn't alone. Standing next to her, silhouetted against the faint light coming from the far corner, was someone Michael never expected to see. Detective Roberts. But this time, he wasn't standing coldly with his hands behind his back.
He was holding something.
Something that made Michael's blood run cold. A folder, thick and bulging with papers, sealed with a red wax stamp. Michael. Sarah's voice broke the silence, shaky and full of regret. I told you to stay away. I told you this was bigger than anything you could imagine, but you had to push. You couldn't leave it alone. Her eyes were wide with fear, but there was something else there too, a quiet desperation that Michael couldn't ignore. I didn't want you to get hurt, but now, she trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Robert stepped forward, a twisted grin pulling at his lips. You think you're the only one in this, Michael? You think you're the only one who's been used? The truth you're looking for isn't the truth at all. His voice was low and dangerous, his words dripping with malice. The people who've been watching you, they've been watching us all for a long time. Your investigation was never about Evan, never about Sarah.
It was about you.
And the choices you made. Michael's heart dropped into his stomach. What are you talking about? He managed to choke out, his throat dry, his legs trembling beneath him. This is about Evan. You and Sarah, this is about what happened to him. He's been missing for weeks. You still don't get it, Roberts interrupted with a low chuckle, his eyes narrowing. You've been so focused on one person, one event, that you've missed the real picture. The ones who orchestrated this, they're much closer than you think. They've been in your life for far longer than you realize. Michael felt like the ground was slipping from under him. His head was spinning, the pieces of the puzzle scattered and broken, unable to form any coherent image.
Who is it?
Who's behind this? But before Roberts could answer, Sarah stepped forward, her face drawn and pale. It's not just about Evan or you. It's about something much larger. There are people, powerful people, who control everything. Everything you've seen, everything you've believed, it's all part of their plan. Your investigation, your obsession with finding the truth, it's what they wanted. And now that you've started, there's no turning back. Michael's world began to tilt. Was Sarah really part of this? Was she another pawn in a game he couldn't even begin to understand? His trust in her had always been solid, but now, standing in front of him, she was just another piece in the tangled web of lies. Why, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Why would you do this? Why would you help them? You promised me. His words trailed off, a painful lump rising in his throat. Because I didn't have a choice, Sarah said, her voice breaking. I couldn't risk your life. They said if I let you get too close, they'd kill you. You don't know what these people are capable of. They've been watching you, tracking your every move. The truth you want so badly? It's a lie. And now it's too late. Michael's mind raced as the weight of her words settled on him. There was no one he could trust. Not Sarah, not Roberts. And the people behind this, whoever they were, had orchestrated everything from the beginning. His investigation, his relentless pursuit of the truth, had been their plan all along. They had been pulling the strings, watching him like a puppet, waiting for the right moment to pounce. The sound of footsteps echoed from the shadows, and Michael's eyes shot to the entrance of the warehouse. More people. They were closing in, and there was no escape. No way out. We'll see just how far you'll go to uncover the truth now, Robert said, his tone mocking, as he tossed the folder onto the ground in front of Michael. But I'm afraid you're too late. Michael stared at the folder, his pulse pounding in his ears, the walls closing in around him. The game had changed. The stakes were higher than he ever could have imagined. And now, the real truth, what it all meant, was slipping further from his grasp with every passing second. The tension in the warehouse was suffocating, like the heavy weight of a storm just before it breaks. Michael stood frozen, staring at the folder on the ground in front of him, his heart racing as every word Sarah had said echoed in his mind. There was no escaping now. He had come too far, pushed too hard to let this end without getting to the truth, no matter the cost. The room felt smaller, darker, as the footsteps grew louder, closer. Roberts and Sarah watched him closely, their expressions unreadable, but Michael knew that whatever came next, it wouldn't be anything like what he expected. They'd been lying to him from the start. All of them. Everything he thought he understood. The mystery of Evan, the strange coincidences, the web of secrets, had led him right here, to this moment. He couldn't trust anyone anymore, not even Sarah. With a shaking hand, he reached down and grabbed the folder, his fingers brushing against the cold metal seal. As soon as it came loose, the folder opened, spilling its contents onto the concrete floor. Dozens of photos, documents, maps, and notes scattered in every direction. But there was one photo that caught his eye immediately, and when he picked it up, everything in his mind seemed to go blank. It was a picture of him. But it wasn't just any picture. It was an old photo, taken years ago, when he was a kid, standing beside his parents at a family gathering. His heart stopped as his eyes locked onto one particular figure in the background, someone who should never have been there. A man he had only seen once, a man who had been involved in something he'd forgotten long ago. But there he was, in the background of the photo, looking straight at the camera, as if he knew Michael would find this one day. The man had a cold, calculating look in his eyes, just like Robert's.
Just like Sarah.
It took Michael a moment to catch his breath, the pieces of the puzzle starting to form a picture he wasn't ready to see. The betrayal, the lies, the manipulation, it wasn't just about Evan, or even about the people he had been chasing. It was about him. He had been part of this from the beginning, a pawn in a game so much larger than he could have ever imagined. Why didn't you tell me? Michael's voice cracked as he looked at Sarah, his eyes pleading. Why didn't you warn me? All this time, I thought you were trying to help me, but you were just using me. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, and for a moment, Michael thought she might break. But instead, she took a deep breath and straightened, as if bracing for the inevitable. You don't understand, Michael. I didn't want you to know. I didn't want you to get involved. But you. Her voice trailed off, and she shook her head. It was too late. The moment you started digging into Evan's disappearance, it was too late. They were already watching you. They knew you'd get too close, but they couldn't risk losing you as part of their plan. You were never supposed to find out like this. But now what? Michael whispered, a sick realization settling over him. He turned to Roberts, the man who had been guiding him through this entire twisted ordeal, the man who had pretended to be an ally. What the hell is going on here? Who the hell are you really? Robert stepped forward, his face cold and emotionless. You think you were special, Michael? That this was all about you? You were just another piece in the puzzle, just like everyone else. The truth you've been chasing, the real mystery, isn't about Evan or Sarah. It's about control, manipulation, and power. It's about making sure the right people stay in power, no matter what.
It was always about you.
You were a test, a trial run. And you failed. Michael's heart was pounding in his chest now, the words cutting through him like shards of glass. He was more than just a bystander in this twisted game. He was the very reason it all existed. He had been groomed for this moment, just like every other person who had gotten too close to the truth. You think you can just pull the strings from behind the curtain and no one will notice? That you can control everything? Michael's voice rose with anger, his hands shaking with the weight of everything he had uncovered. Well, I'm done. I'm done letting you play me. If this is how it ends, then so be it. But you won't get away with it. Roberts' lips curled into a sinister smile. You really think you have a choice? He stepped back, signaling to someone in the shadows, and that's when Michael realized the entire warehouse had been a trap. A loud crash interrupted their conversation, and Michael spun toward the noise, his heart racing. There, standing in the doorway, was someone he hadn't expected. It was Evan, but not the way he remembered. His face was bruised, battered, and his eyes were empty, as though the light had gone out of him. His hands were tied, and he looked more like a shell of the person Michael had been searching for. Evan! Michael shouted, rushing toward him, but Roberts held up a hand, signaling for him to stop. It's too late for heroics, Michael, Roberts said, his voice cold. This was always the plan. Evan was never supposed to make it out. He was part of the bigger picture, the one you're still too blind to see. Everything you've done, everything you've tried, it's all led to this. And now that you've seen it, now that you understand, the only thing left is for you to make your choice. Michael's mind was racing, his thoughts a blur as he glanced between Roberts, Sarah, and Evan. There was no way out. There was no easy decision. The truth, the real truth, was something too dark, too twisted for him to handle. And yet, he couldn't stop himself from asking the one question that had been haunting him since the beginning. What now? Before Roberts could answer, everything seemed to freeze. The air became thick, and Michael felt a chill run down his spine. The final twist was coming. Just as Roberts opened his mouth to speak, the floor beneath them suddenly cracked. The room shook violently, and the lights flickered. The walls groaned as if the entire building were about to collapse. In that moment, Michael realized something. The conspiracy, everything he had uncovered, wasn't just a story. It wasn't just about one missing person, one lie, or one betrayal. It was about the entire system. And the real question was, what would happen now that the walls had come crashing down? As the dust settled, the true scope of the conspiracy revealed itself in a way Michael had never seen coming. And just as he prepared for the final confrontation, the ground beneath him gave way entirely, plunging him into a darkness far deeper than anything he had ever known. And the story? It was far from over. Days passed after the collapse of the warehouse, and with each one, Michael felt the weight of everything he'd uncovered pressing harder against him. He was no longer sure if the events that had led him here were part of a greater conspiracy, or if they had all been a brutal reminder of how deep the roots of betrayal went. The dust had settled, the questions answered, at least most of them, but peace felt elusive, slipping through his fingers like sand. He had uncovered the darkness, exposed the lies, but as he sat alone in his apartment, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. The police had been slow to act, caught in the aftermath of an investigation so tangled that even the most experienced officers seemed unsure where to begin. Sarah had disappeared, her involvement in the conspiracy becoming an undeniable truth. Roberts had been arrested, but his calm demeanor in the face of his capture only deepened Michael's sense that the story wasn't finished yet. Evan, despite being freed from the clutches of the operation, was never the same. He had come to Michael's aid when it mattered most, but the trauma of everything he'd endured, being a pawn in a much larger game, had changed him. They exchanged few words, and in the silence between them, Michael knew the bond they once shared was irrevocably broken. No matter how many truths were uncovered, there would be no going back to the way things were. But the mysteries that had led him here still lingered in his mind, unanswered. Why had he been chosen to unravel all of this? What was the real purpose behind it all? What had he been a part of before he even realized it? Was he truly just a pawn, or was there something deeper he hadn't yet understood? The more he thought about it, the more he realized that the web of lies and deceit was just one layer of something far more complex. Then, on a quiet afternoon, as he sifted through the final bits of evidence that had been left behind, he found the letter. It wasn't addressed to him. It was a personal note, written in a handwriting he recognized immediately. It was from his father. The words were simple, almost cryptic in their calmness, but they changed everything. It spoke of his family's involvement in the operations, of decisions made before his birth, of debts owed to powerful figures he could never know. The letter was a warning. It revealed that Michael had always been a part of something larger than himself, something beyond his comprehension. His father had known, and perhaps had hoped that one day Michael would come to understand the depth of it all. But at what cost? The letter didn't offer solutions. It didn't absolve him of the weight of his actions, nor did it promise any kind of redemption. It left him with more questions than answers, and that's when it hit him. Some mysteries were never meant to be fully solved. Some pieces of the puzzle would always be missing, and no matter how much he uncovered, there would always be something just beyond reach. The truth was elusive, and sometimes finding it meant accepting that some things were too dangerous to know. As Michael closed the letter and set it aside, he realized the truth of his situation. There was no closure. There was no final victory. But there was something else, something that had been there all along, hidden beneath the layers of lies and half-truths. It was the awareness that he had survived, that he had endured when so many others had been lost. And while the conspiracy that had enveloped him may have been defeated, the world was still out there, vast and unknown, filled with secrets waiting to be uncovered. In the end, Michael had found his peace, not in the answers he had sought, but in the realization that some things were meant to remain mysteries. His journey had changed him in ways he couldn't fully explain, and as he walked away from the wreckage of his past, there was an unsettling quietness in the air. But that quiet wasn't empty. It was filled with the weight of everything he had learned, of everything that had come to light, and of everything that was still hidden in the shadows. The final twist, the last unanswered question, remained with him, like a constant echo, a reminder that no matter how much he tried to leave the past behind, it would always be there, just out of reach. Michael looked out over the city, knowing that while this chapter had ended, the story was far from over. And just before the screen faded to black, there was one final thought that lingered, unanswered and unresolved. Had Michael truly escaped the shadows, or had they simply become a part of him? The audience would never know for sure, and that uncertainty would hang in the air long after the credits rolled, leaving them to question everything they had just witnessed, long after the story had ended.